So what I'm going to do today is give you a little bit basic on the geoscientific development of this unique region. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to the geos. So you have seals, but you have also got geos, so that you know a little bit more about that. And the developments we've had with trying to figure out how we can collaborate much better or even more between seals and geos. And this doesn't work. So we have to point, that's not so, yeah, thank you. So I do this presentation both as a SOAC member, but also as a Arctic chair. So one of the things I've been doing as an Arctic chair is to try to get this collaboration going. And you will learn more about this through the session. But I want all of you to use this session, my presentation, to think about getting hopefully inspired, but also to think about how can we actually increase this collaboration in the Nordic Arctic. And then after my presentation, this nice gentleman sitting in front, he's going to chair a panel of other colleagues that's going to come up here. And then we will see what they think. One of them is online as well. And then we'll have a discussion in the end about how can we actually develop this collaboration. And it's very important that you all provide good input for this. So I look forward to this presentation. Okay, now there's someone else who wants to do something. Okay, yeah. Good. So we start with the geoscience of the Nordic Arctic. When you look at the bathymetrical map of the Northern Hemisphere like this, it's very obvious to you what has been going on. It's like a puzzle. So you can easily see that we're actually belonging together between Svalbard and Greenland. And if you go about 60, now it makes noise when you push the button. When you go 60 million years back in time, you can actually see how Svalbard was kind of at the same location as Northern Greenland today. It means that the geology is the same in this area. And since then, the plates have been moving apart. First, what happened was the opening between Greenland and Canada, as you see here, but that stopped after a while geologically. And then it moved to the opening between Greenland and Svalbard. And this is still going on. So actually, Svalbard today is traveling some millimeters away from Greenland all the time. But don't worry, it's not with a very quick speed. We'll come back to the distances and so on. Again, this doesn't work. It's not a very impressive system here today. But anyway, do I have to go and push the button? Thank you. So what does the climatic conditions look like across this gradient? So this is actually just simple graphs of what is the climate, what is the air temperature on both sides. So you can see that if you look at Longyearbyen, we are much warmer than what we have at Station Nord, which is at the northernmost tip of Greenland. And if we even look into seasons, it becomes even more obvious. So you can see this is the time of the year, so autumn, where the temperature difference is the largest. It's quite warm on Svalbard, but it's already around -25 in northern Greenland. So very large distance. And if you go to summer, it's much more the same conditions. It's only 2 to 3 to 4 degrees difference. So this is the largest climatic gradient we have in the northern hemisphere in the high Arctic between these two areas. And I'll show you in a little while how far the distance is. But before we go that way, we also have to look at what's the geography of the Nordic area. Now we talked about the geoscientific development, but if you look at the geography of the Nordic area, this is actually also quite important to have in mind when we think about how to collaborate. So there's 26 million people living inside the Nordic area in the Arctic. You see the Nordic being all the colored areas on this map over here. And we have kind of open borders in this area. You can decide as a citizen where you want to live, and you can actually also talk to most other people because the language barriers are not like very distinct. There are some, but you can actually freely move within this region. So that's also important to keep in mind. But then coming back to the gradient, what is the gradient really like? Well, it's only about 720 kilometers from here to Station Nord. And that means that you can basically fly there in 2 hours using the Dornier from here. I have had my first experience at the Willum Research Station at Station Nord was actually a day trip together with this nice man, where we had breakfast in Longyearbyen, and then we went to the airport. We took the plane over there. We had some time. I needed to find some drill holes, and unfortunately, I had to return here because of work things. But we still managed to have a day there. We had lunch there. We flew back home, and I had dinner at home at my table in Longyearbyen. That's actually possible. It was very thought-provoking for me that it's possible like that. Okay, so what's going on here with the geological development over these last 54 million years? We now actually allow 2 sea currents to dominate this area, and that's the background for the climatic difference. So we have the North Atlantic current coming up, bringing warm water up to Svalbard, and at the same time, the Arctic Ocean is exporting cold water down along the Greenland east coast. That's the East Greenlandic current, and that is what is causing this big climatic difference. And then how have we actually used this area? Well, if you look upon the region, there's of course always been research going on, but actually only within the last 30 years have we seen development of infrastructure. You're sitting in one of them, the research park on Svalbard. UNIS was established 30 years ago. And then 2 years later, the ZERO Sackenberg Ecological Research Operation was established down here in Greenland. And this is actually the first place that in the region that started systematically to collect observations and data. And then later on, you can see that there's a jump in time. 2014, the Willum Research Station was established at the military base called Station Nord in northern Greenland. And almost at the same time, SIOS started to operate here. I mean, the start of SIOS you can debate because it's a long process, but really the action phase started around that time. And then in 2020, so very, very recently, GEOS got up and running as well. And you'll see how this last 30 years of establishment of infrastructure and observation systems are the new thing to this region. And this is our challenge. How do we use this in a much better way? So we'll go on to presenting you a little bit to GEOS, because I think some of you know what it is, but not all. And it's important to understand what this is. When I first saw the acronym, I was like proud, because of course we have GEOS, it's well established. Wow, they copied it to Greenland, I thought. GEOS, it's the same acronym, Greenland Integrated Observing System. And you can read a bit about it here, so you see that it has some kind of the same ambitions. It's mainly run by Danish, from institutions from the Danish kingdom, including Greenland, of course. And it's kind of covering all kinds of observations and research related to environmental change and climate change all over Greenland. It's also going to develop sustainable research infrastructure, you can see, and they actually have a focus on using green energy so that they actually don't put a large footprint in there. Greenland is a continent, it's pretty large, so if you have to travel all the time, that's kind of very complicated. If you think it's complicated in Svalbard, it is 10 times as complicated and expensive in Greenland. So that is why. And you also have the web address in case you want to see more about GEOS. But I can just mention that it touches on many different parameters that is the same as SIOS. So it has atmosphere, it looks at ice sheets, hydrology, permafrost, sea ice, snow. It will expose in the marine environment and on land, but it also deals with space weather. So it's very comparable in many ways to what is going on in GEOS. And you can see the numbers on this slide here. It basically, it basically shows a location of the different activities all over Greenland. One thing that I think you should notice that is a new development that is going on in GEOS is that they have started to deploy these autonomous operating units, or containers, you maybe call them, in different parts of the not ice-covered parts of Greenland, basically trying to cover different gradients. And in these containers, they are, as you can see, powered by solar panels, but also windmills. They can suck in air and do all kinds of observations. And they are trying to establish these things now in order to reduce, of course, the carbon emissions and reduce the presence that you have to come to the field. And if you want to know more about that, they actually very recently released a paper on these mobile observatories in a journal called Hardware X. And it is first authored by Professor Søren Brysgaard from Aarhus University, who is also the leader or the director of GEOS. So there you can actually see how they're trying not just to do atmospheric measurements, but also touch on all the other environments that we also have and are dealing with in GEOS. And data is, of course, also an issue in GEOS, and they have the same ambition as GEOS to have fair data, have a very successful data portal, maybe not just a data portal, but a gateway, which also deals with logistics, called ISAFIC. And I'll show you a little bit more about that, because that is also where there are some similarities to what is going on in Svalbard, but there's also some differences. So ISAFIC, that is a kind of a system that everyone can use. It's a gateway to all Arctic scientific overviews, you could say, but also to actually increase the collaboration across the borders. It is Greenlandic for gateway, and everyone can use it. So it means that if you are curious about what's going on in Greenland, you can basically go in and have a look at this website. It will be providing overviews of research projects and all of these things, and also logistics. And it's coordinated by a nice person called Peter Schmidt-Mikkelsen, who is a GEOS outreach coordinator at the University of Aarhus. So what can you do in ISAFIC? What can it provide you with? It can give you a list of who's doing which things. It can tell you also when they are doing which things, so you can have very nice overviews of this. And you can have maps that shows activities. You can get more details about projects. And this is, of course, not so far away from what REIS does, the Research in Svalbard database does, that Svalbard Science Forum is running. But there's some more direct links also to logistics. And it's also some of the same things that is in the SciOS notice board on logistics and so on. So this is clearly one of the sites where we could maybe see more collaboration in the future. So what are the use of this? Because this is, of course, important. And it already has more than 700 scientists and users registered. And it has a database of more than 4,000 fieldwork activities. You can see that it has more than almost 700 infrastructures included in this, and many data links as well. And of course, a lot of Greenlandic and Danish universities and institutions are involved. Actually also the Arctic Command, so that's the military in Greenland. But it also has, interestingly, several international partners that is contributing to that. And you can even see that the Arctic University of Norway is involved in this collaboration, and so is AVI. So we have some of our SciOS partners that's also in ISAFIC. Okay, so this was the training about geoscience and about what is GEOS. And now we'll start looking at summing up the first part. So what is the potential in the Nordic Arctic? Well, we've seen we have this largest climatic gradient in the high Arctic, from warm Svalbard to cold Greenland. We have both CEOS and now GEOS established, so we have large collaboration potential. And we have now a new situation in the world where half of the Arctic, basically everything that is yellow on this map, is kind of out of Arctic collaboration. You probably heard a lot about that. And that brings us to a situation where we actually have to use the Nordic Arctic even more and the rest of the Arctic, basically. So this is the situation when I kind of, for about a year ago, started thinking about how can we do this even better. But before I tell you that, I'll give you a little bit the history of how far have we come in this collaboration. We run the first kind of Svalgreen workshop, Svalgreen meaning Svalbard, Greenland, in 2017. But before then, we actually had the people who built the Willem Research Station started to come here because they flew to Svalbard to get to Greenland and build up the station. And while they were doing that, UNIS was discussing with them, how can we actually collaborate? So we made a collaboration agreement and signed it. This is the then UNIS director and the leader of the Willem Research Station signing this in 2017 as a result of the first collaboration. And then we ran a Svalgreen workshop, which was the first time where we brought some scientists together from Greenland and Denmark and Svalbard and international partners working in these areas to try to figure out what are the opportunities. We did a lot of outreach papers from this conference or workshop. and we did a short commentary, which has also been describing the possibilities. At the same time, we tried to get some money really to do some great things together, both on research but also education. From the Norwegian Foreign Ministry, there's some program called Arctic 2030, and we submitted an application to them with a quite high ambition for workshops, adjunct positions to increase the collaboration, pilot courses, field work, and so on. And unfortunately, this wasn't funded. We also had a small attempt with the University of the Arctic, Arctic, with a Danish partner from the Danish Technical University and myself from UNIS. We tried to see if we could start at least developing some joint courses at university level. That was the year after. It also didn't get funded. So kind of when we came to 2019, I was thinking, oh yeah, this is not going to work. And we can't really do that. There's not enough people who's willing to do this. So that was kind of the situation. But then I went to my sabbatical at Aarhus University at Risø in Roskilde. It is outside that building that we're standing here. And the people you see in this picture, some of them are in the room, so I won't point them out because you know them pretty well. But I can point one out, and that is the leader of the GEARS program, Professor Søren Rysgaard. And then we have Heikki here, so SEARS. And so I made matchmaking. So I made SEARS meet GEARS, and we had a very nice day discussing how can we actually do this collaboration, and decided to try to figure out, have a process, and we figured out who is going to be involved in this process so that we actually increase the use of both SEARS and GEARS in a pan-Arctic perspective, and both for research but also for higher education. So we applied for another Svalbard strategic grant, and we got it in May. And then this was the organizing committee, the leaders of the different parts of SEARS and GEARS, and myself. So what happened was that we spent the summer figuring out what are we going to do, which people are we going to pull together. And this is a photo that quite many of you are on, or some, from this workshop that we held in the beginning of October in the Royal Library in Copenhagen. At the meeting at Aarhus University, one of the participants said, we need to have this meeting where the politicians or the political level is. So it needs to be in downtown Copenhagen so that everyone can walk there. And to some degree it worked, because we actually got a lot of some participants from different ministries in Denmark. We got, for instance, the Greenlandic Research Council represented, the director of the Faroese Research Council. We had Svalbard Science Forum there. They're also here. Thank you, Caroline. We also had the Arctic Command represented, president of UArctic, and SEARS and GEARS, some selected researchers there. So that was really nice. It was a good process to start thinking about who actually matters in this case. And so what I'm going to do now is show you some of the highlights of the workshop, because we actually made people, or we tried to force people from both SEARS and GEARS to work together within their topics and tell us how far they've come in this collaboration. This was more or less successful. But I'm going to give you my version of how successful this was. So when you ask people in the sea to talk about this, it's very easy. They immediately make presentations that has names from both Greenlandic Danish partners and Norwegian partners, international partners, because they are measuring directly in the Fram Strait, on the same ship, they're on the same platform. Done that for a long period of time. So this became very obvious that the Fram Strait Observatory is a thing where it's already a lot of collaboration going on since a long time. There are ambitions and also developments to use European research infrastructures in this area, as you can see over here, using Argos and gliders and so on, and developing this also to become part of GEARS and SEARS and so on, and also using that for education at high sea. But not only looking at the modern day perspective, but actually also going back in time. That was a presentation from Aarhus University with partners from both sides on all the different points where you can actually obtain cores and study climate archives back in time. So I think we can check off that there's nice collaboration going on in the sea. And then if you go up into air and look into remote sensing or spaceborne observations, we also saw that there's actually quite some activity, obviously, in Greenland, flying around using twin otters. And the interesting thing is that they actually also very often cruise across here and even does observations on Svalbard, as you can see. And we also saw presentations of several papers which actually has authors from both sides, where you see that there's collaboration on these things, sometimes focusing on even Svalbard areas with a lot of Danish and Greenlandic authors and so on. And also contributing to the observatories, and not just looking up, but also looking down, obviously, and helping out with figuring out this ice thickness. So we can also check that point out. So that's actually also some collaboration going on. When we move to the land areas, it's much less, obviously, but there are a few examples of things going on. One of them being methane measurements that has been compared directly, actually with a large push from the Interact project, the EU project, basically measuring with chambers, both in West Greenland and Kobbefjord, and at Sakkenberg in East Greenland that you saw, and at Atvendalen here in Svalbard, and comparing these. And this is work done by a Swedish funded PhD student that has also been working here with us at UNIS, so that we can actually directly compare the methane fluxes versus day of the year and versus growing degree days, as you can see here, across the gradient. And that's published. So some of these things has happened. And the recommendations from the people in Greenland presenting this was that it is really nice to have Svalbard as a possibility for year-round attention, meaning you can test things, and then it's easier to put them out and put them into operation in the field in Greenland, where you cannot have the same access as you have here in Svalbard. It would be nice, they pointed out, to have data availability for sharing in research projects and students. It would be nice to have joint educational opportunities, courses, summer schools as mentioned, and maybe even thematic workshops on an ad hoc basis. And then, of course, I'm not going to not say something about permafrost today, so of course I'll teach you a little bit about permafrost, but you can see me as an example. So I'm just trying to explain to you. My background is I actually started working in Greenland before I got here, so more than 20 years ago. So I have always looked a bit over there and thought we should still have this possibility. This is just the mean annual air temperatures in this region, as you have seen before. And so what we've done with permafrost, I am an international permafrost person. So I work with the permafrost ECVs. We all know that means the essential climate variables. And this for permafrost is permafrost temperature and active layer thickness. So we try to establish that from Greenland. And we actually tried opening this gradient, not just for research, but also for students. So I'm an old person, of course. So in the IPY, the previous one, we started bringing students to study across this gradient. And at that time, I was so optimistic thinking, yeah, we can easily organize that. It almost killed me. I spent all my energy for 2 years to making sure we could have this group go around. And there's so much work on this that I decided afterwards, oh my goodness, I'm never going to do it again. And you can see it took from 2008 until 2013 that I dared to do another course across this gradient. The first one was IPY funding. The second one was funding from Nordforsk, the Nordic Council. Otherwise, we couldn't have done that. And it's only one time you do this, because you, as the course coordinator, have to do everything, logistics and everything. And then we also did research based across this gradient. And actually what you're seeing in this photo here is the permafrost drill rig we have here at UNIS that actually made it to Sakkenberg. That's a very long story, which I won't bore you with, but I was young and optimistic, so we shipped it to Sakkenberg, and it was gone for about 2 years before it came back. But we got boreholes done over there, and that was also thanks to an EU project called Page 21, the activities of the Center for Excellent Research on Permafrost at the University of Copenhagen, and Interact, so EU again. Had we not had these funding sources, we couldn't have moved people across. So we were bringing students from this side to Greenland to drill because they don't have that capacity over there. We also went up to Station Nord and being part of the establishment of the Willem Research Station in 2014. The same drill rig now was flying with all the air bridge that was between Svalbard and northern Greenland while the station was being established. So again, I was optimistic. We shipped it over there while they had this air bridge. And then we went back in August and did drilling sites, boreholes. And this is now a drill rig that is part of the infrastructure of SIOS. It's being expanded in the Infanor program and almost finished. But we didn't actually quite know how it was going to come back because the air bridge has finished. But then luckily the windows in the new stations were broken because they had done a little bit of a different calculation how high can you fly windows in a plane. So they needed to have the small plane from Svalbard come over with some new windows. And that's the only way we got our drill rig back within maybe it could have lasted 2 years if it should have sailed and been flying and so on, back and forth. And the only reason why I tell you all these details is because you need to know how difficult it is to work across this gradient if you work on land. We did get back, thanks to some Interact funding again, so you can see how important that is, to do some field work of mapping the area and looking after our boreholes and downloading and more like that. And actually, that's the reason why I can show you this slide, which is the stratigraphy that we have investigated from the 20-meter deep boreholes that we made, 2 of them over there. You see the data from 2014 to 2021. And just to sum up, we see this quite significant warming rate of 0.07 degrees at 20 meters per year. And that is very comparable to what we see on the west coast of Spitsbergen, Svalbard, at Kapliné. We haven't published a comparison yet, but we published this thing. So that is existing from the Willem Research Station. We have one paper where we tried to pull together all the active layers, so the other ECV, the thickening and the controls on that across the gradient in the entire Nordic area and comparing that to the circumarctic. This was published a few years ago, 2020, and it's one of actually more cited papers in this journal. And I was a little bit first intrigued, why is this? But I'm sure it's because we did this Pan-Arctic upscaling and we're comparing the development we saw in this region to what is going on in the Pan-Arctic scale. You can see that when you go to the Abisko area in northern Sweden, we have a much longer data series, but we can see the increase in active layer thickness going on in the Nordic area is also going on up here on Svalbard, and that we have much thicker active layers up here. Won't bore you with all the details, but you can see that the range of active layers are the largest up here in Svalbard compared to any of the Arctic regions, and the rate of change is the same as we see in the rest of the world. That is what you see in the other 2 graphs here. And finally, what we also now can see, and when you're a permafrost scientist, this is really heaven, because you have temperatures ranging from around -8 up at Willem Research Station, -7 here down at Sackenberg, very warm -3 up here in Svalbard. And of course, if you go to northern Scandinavia, you come very close to 0 degrees and some sites start losing permafrost. So wow, we have everything in permafrost in this region, which we like to explore, of course, as well. So that was the little journey through what we kind of learned at our workshops. And then I will tell you some potentials that we identified from this workshop, that surely we can develop joint research proposals. It could be EU, could be national ones, it could be privately funded. We also had private foundations at the workshop, which was interesting. That is a possibility, hasn't happened yet. We can discuss in our panel why, maybe. We also had a working group on education. I was in that one. And we started saying that we need to start using the SIOS and GEOS data for education much more. And we should probably be building some master degrees that would be inter-university, that can really kind of move students freely between the universities we have, or get them to at least have remotely access to all of this using the nice data portals. And maybe we should start thinking about the Erasmus that was mentioned. This is the EU funding instrument for that. We'll come a bit back to that later on. And we need to also have quick action, the logistics group said, because that was the third group, to try to see what's going to happen to the Dornier. This was at a time where we didn't know what was going to happen to our Dornier plane here on Svalbard. And the Greenlandic partners were quite upset, because if the Dornier plane wouldn't be flying from Svalbard, there would be no way to take people from Svalbard to Willum Research Station. So big problem solved now, as you know. So that is nice. We decided also to produce some outreach material about this gradient. So a flyer will be produced, and while talking about that, we also talked about the name, because up until this workshop, we called the whole project or ambition Svalgreen, Svalbard, Greenland. But there were both people from Greenland and from Svalbard that was saying, this is not a good name. We don't understand what it means. So we had to come up with a better name. And we ended up on suggesting something called bridging the Fram Strait. Bridging meaning it's not just in the sea, it's actually a bridge that stands on both sides. So it's also including the terrestrial areas, you could say. Yeah. So then I want to tell you a little bit about what is the potential. So now we finished with what we did at the workshop, but I'm outlining to teach you a little bit more about what is actually the history and the research potential in this area seen as I see it. So I'm both a Danish and Norwegian citizen, by the way. So I'm trying to know this scene a little bit from both sides. But the interesting thing is that there's a lot of interest in Greenland. You may have heard about a person called Donald Trump. And he had an interesting kind of vision, maybe, or idea, business deal, I think he called it, some years ago. He actually said on world TV, I want to buy Greenland. And there was like an outcry in the Danish kingdom. That, of course, didn't happen. But in 1931, the Norwegian government actually decided to occupy parts of Greenland. From 71 to 78 to 75 degrees north, the Norwegian government said that's going to be our part of Greenland, because we have people sailing there, fishing, hunting, and so on. And that ended up as a court case at the International Court in Hague. And they decided, no, Greenland belongs to the Danish kingdom. And ever since that, there's been some kind of focus on this nationality and who does which things. And when I was young, I met the old scientists that were working in Norway and Svalbard and so on, and Greenland. The Greenlandic ones, they told me, they kind of took me to the side and said, are you aware that in Tromsø in Norway, there are some photos on the wall from Greenland? So take care when you work with these Norwegians, because they want to go and take Greenland. So you see that this was kind of still reflected at that time. And I think this has been affecting the way these two areas work together. Then you can say, is this changing now? Now we have much stronger focus on cooperation and internationality and so on. And I just published here, or put up the content of the last call from the Norwegian Research Council, which actually has a very nice call coming out that is very soon deadline. Most of you know all the details about it. So to research a project for scientific renewal and with a focus on Svalbard, strengthening knowledge about the environment in Svalbard, seen in a pan-Arctic connection. It's to increase international natural science research in Svalbard. Has to have main activities on and or about Svalbard, and it wants to see increased international collaboration. And projects has to have minimum one international partner, as you can see. But when it comes down to deciding the funding, you can see that priority will be given to projects that includes this international partner with own funding. So it means someone has to have some projects that can be paired. That's how far we have come. And this is natural. I mean, this is national funding. So I think in the end that we need to have a little bit larger ambitions, actually, than what we have had so far. And I'll try to outline what we have we started working on in the education work group. And when you start discussing that with other partners, thinking about what the EU does, you can start to see what are the possibilities. So I think we can actually develop some unique Arctic University Alliance that can innovate Arctic Earth System Science education, in which we have to use the entire Nordic area. And I'll give you a little bit of background for this thinking. So there's potential, sure, for developing long-term committing closer collaboration, much like the EU is doing. I don't know how many of you in here knows the EU universities very well. Wow, I don't see hands like flying up and so on, but okay, we'll get to that. But I think the ambition should be like the EU ambition for Arctic collaboration at university level. But we probably need to get the Arctic Council involved. We get to have UArctic involved, and maybe even have close collaboration with the EU to do this. So if we keep up with the EU in the Erasmus program, there's actually support to establish what they call European universities. At the present moment, there are 44 European universities, which is a very committing closer collaboration. They typically get around up to 15 million euros over 4 or 5 years to establish these things. This can be topically, but it can also be for the entire university. And you can only be a member of one EU university. All the Norwegian universities are members of these EU universities. This is a huge commitment, and it builds on developing stronger and stronger and closer collaboration, deeper institutionalized transnational cooperation. We could do that also in the Arctic and have inter-university campuses. So actually, this means working much closer together than what we do today. It's going to be challenging at the administrative level, but this could enable the use of Earth system infrastructure and the technological development we have in SEERS and GEARS, and actually use the entire Nordic area this way. The interesting thing about it, if you think about the Nordic region, is that it basically contains all the climatic variability we have in this part of the world, in the high Arctic, and it also contains all the Arctic ecosystems. So we have everything within the Nordic area that we can actually do this. And as I've said before, the largest climatic changes occur in the Arctic. This has global consequences. We are in one part of the Arctic that changed the quickest. And we, of course, should allow all students access to education on this. In the Arctic also. That means bringing them to the Arctic. Some remote things, but also bringing people to see this. And we can't have more than 220 student years at UNIS, as an example. So this is not a task that UNIS can solve alone. We can only solve if we collaborate widely in the Arctic. And now I'm going to finish with my vision for how I think we could develop innovative, unique, and deep institutionalized Arctic university collaboration for Earth system science education. You should not think that this isn't about research. All the education you do at universities is research-based. So in the base of this sits research, but it's just a new approach to how can we collaborate. So I think that there is a unique possibility actually to reform the way we normally collaborate and actually focus on training the next generation with, and then there's a very important word, seamless mobility. This means the students should not meet barriers. They should be guided to do this so that they can actually focus on studying across the entire area. And this means that they could obtain degrees, which comes from minimum 2 to 3 institutions, joint degrees. Pretty ambitious, but we need to get there. And we should also be able to apply new ways of learning. And this should include also using the innovative data access. You should be able to sit in a place and access data from other parts of the Arctic, but also to go out in the field and learn about it, of course. And you should be able to study all the Nordic area this way, and maybe also interdisciplinarily. So in order to do that, you definitely would need to rely on what is going on in SEERS and what is going on in GEARS, and many other observation systems. But these two could be the key in this thinking. And the last thing I'm going to do is very provocative. So I'm very happy you sit down, you're still looking quite okay, no one's fallen asleep yet. But that's just a suggestion, which is based on how EU thinks for how this could be done. So potential university partners for such an Earth system science Arctic University Education Alliance. Sorry about long name, but an alliance means you stand together and want to do things. And if you do that based on SEERS, GEARS, there are many other things like Science Arctic Partnerships, INTACT, APEX. It could, and I stress could, consist of a list of universities like this. One rule that is for such collaborations is you never have more than one partner from one country. You try to cover the region widely. So what I've been doing here is, and I've been doing this thinking with a few other partners from the workshop that worked also on education. And then I've also discussed this at something called the Hinskal meeting in Denmark, which is the Danish Kingdom's Arctic workshop every year. And out of that came actually this suggestion that if we combine Aarhus University, which is leading GEARS and a member of UArctic, Tromsø University, the Arctic University of Norway, which is involved in SEERS and UArctic, with Helsinki University, which is in SEERS and UArctic, and Silesia, which is in SEERS and UArctic, Groningen in SEERS and UArctic, Stockholm in UArctic, Ilisimatusarfik from Greenland and the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, also in GEARS and UArctic, then University of Iceland, UArctic, Faroe Islands, maybe even go outside the Nordic area and add some Canadian and US partners that are both in UArctic and also have leadership in the Sentinel collaboration in northern Canada. Then we would end up with a unique combination that could really do a very nice job across this whole area. But now I've been talking for about 35-40 minutes. No one fallen asleep. It's been nice. I've enjoyed it. And I hope I've warmed you up to provoke you to some possibilities that we have here, because we need to be ambitious for how we take this further on. So thank you very much for your attention.